Okay, so we are continuing with our descent into the story of the spider and the fly, which is centered around the collision, the relationship, the unity, the oppositional dance between the Shpoler Zayda and Rabbi Nachman, the unity between Chochma and Binah. And what we've discussed so far is the awakening of the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, where Binah and the rectification of the externality of Malchus has awoken itself to all of the victories that it's gone through, to all of the processes that it's gone through in order to descend down, down, down into the territory of concealment and to ascend upwards to reveal the inner interiority of Chochma, which is the light of Keser, something that could not have been revealed without the descent. And this king, the way that the celebration and the ascendancy of Bina and the purpose of the descent is expressed is by way of the mockery of the Sari HaMelech. That these Sarim, these officers, are imitating everybody else. They're making a schoik out of Mitzias. And they're revealing how all of the seriousness and all of the severity and all of the hyper essential nature in which things are revealed, how in truth it's not as true as we assume it to be, and that there's a way to laugh at it, and there's a way to detach ourselves from the heaviness of all things by breathing air into it, by way of making schloik out of it, by way of laughing with it, not laughing at it, but laughing with it. That's what the Sari HaMelucha are revealing on Rosh Hashanah, the Hischak Liyom Acharon of the acknowledgement that when we descend down through the capacity of Bina, we come to realize that it's specifically through the concealment and the darkness that we come to reveal HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. That secret of V'nahapechu. Laughter, this point of the comedic mockery, is the inversion, is the undoing of a system of significance, transforming it at its root, yet still maintaining its significance. There's a nihilistic laughter that seeks to destroy all significance, to look at a system of meaning and to point out the meaninglessness in it. That's a leitzanus of avodah zarah. That's a devaluing and a destruction of meaning. But then there's the schoik of Rosh Hashanah, the v'tischak liyom acharon, the schoik of the hamtakas adinim b'sharasham, which is not a nihilistic laughter. It's not undoing significance, but rather it's transforming what we conceived as the roots of significance. It's an oilam hafuch. It reveals that avada there's significance, but the significance has nothing to do with what you assumed was the strict regimen of your perception of significance. In truth, there's a hyper significance that ascends from beyond all of our attempts at human signification, and that's the significance of the schoik ha'elyon. So it's not a laughter that destroys, but rather it's a laughter that cracks up the hiddenness and the concealment and reveals the lightness of being that rests at the core of all things. Bina, the territory of the Yetzer Hara, needs to be protected because Bina is going to be a descent into constriction. And when we look at things from a perspective of light and the ideals, so then there's really no room for constriction. The only thing that is going to protect constriction as a formidable expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in the world is when we can understand the higher purpose of constriction and concealment. If we think that the ideal is light and that the descent away from the ideal is darkness, then there's no reason for maintaining the process of darkness. But if we come to realize that darkness itself is also light and it's a form of revelation that can't be revealed other than by way of the descent, and that it serves a fundamental purpose, in that way we can be mamtik the dinim and we can re-include it within the system. And so, like we said, the light of Bina, which goes down into the territories of Chitzonius of Malchus, in order to ascend afterwards with the newfound illumination of the lower worlds, that revelation of the schoik is what shows the value of darkness. Because the light of Chochma thinks it knows everything. The light of Chochma thinks it has a very clear picture of what reality is, what the self is, and what Hashem is. But in that seriousness and in that sobriety and the heavy-headedness of Chochma, so we can run into the trap of thinking that we've perfected it. And therefore the descent into Bina, the descent into the realms of constriction and concealment, are ultimately there to remind us perpetually that no, we don't have it figured out yet. And that's that schok that pokes a hole in the seriousness, and it reveals that even though there's meaning, we don't have the full grasp of meaning yet. And that's the schok of Bina, that's the light of Rosh Hashanah, which teaches us to begin again every second. And so this nature of the benefit of constriction is revealed through the concept of Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to constrict his infinite light in order to create reality. The biggest joke in the world is that Hashem has concealed his infinite light and revealed a finite reality where that light is concealed. That's the schok. That's the big joke that Rabbeinu Ha'arizal revealed to us, that Rav Yitzchak Luria revealed to us. The schok of Yitzchak, the laughter of Yitzchak, which is the laughter of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the joke which seems to conceal the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that we're perpetually reminded that there's so much that we don't know. And that happens by way of the descent down into Binah, away from the clarified light of Chochma. Because just as the infinite light prior to the creation of the world is the element of Chochma, the Tzimtzum is the element of Binah. And so this necessity, this reality, in which we have to make space for constriction and concealment, is a byproduct of the Tzimtzum. We've spoken about in numerous places that there's two ways in which the Tzimtzum can be revealed. The Arizal had two Talmidim. The Arizal had Rav Chaim Vital, and the Arizal had Rav Yisrael Sarug. Now, these two Talmidim are Train Rei and Deloimus Parshan Alman. They're two beloved elements that are never separated one from the other. And from within both of them, the full picture of the Kabbalah of the Arizal is revealed. The lower worlds of Adam Kadmon and Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya are associated with the Kabbalah of Rav Chaim Vital, as conveyed to us in the Eitz Chaim. But the upper worlds of the Olam HaMalbush, of the worlds of Adam Kadmon Stima'a, of Avir Kadmon, and the Olam HaMalbush, the Tihiru Ilah, those are the worlds of Rav Yisrael Sarug. We've explained that the model of Tzimtzum, as it's revealed in these two worlds, is very different. In the world of Rav Chaim Vital, which is the Tzimtzum that we know of, Tzimtzum is an act of concealment. It's an act of apparent removal and the appearance of a voided space in which we are forced to at least conceive of God's absence. In the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, the Tzimtzum is an act of concealment. In the Kabbalah of Mahari Sarug, of Rav Yisrael Sarug, the Tzimtzum is a very different type of thing. It's not an act of concealment or siluk ha'or, or a removal of light, but rather it is a furthering of the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of garbing himself in a levush of concealment. That Kahadem Kamsa de Levushim and Eyubei, the world of the Malbush, is the externalization of the interiority of the infinite that folds itself outwards, so to say, and in that externalized fold, it congeals and it takes on certain form and certain definition, and that in and of itself is the Tzimtzum. In the world of Rav Chaim Vital, the Tzimtzum is a removal. And then in the absence of the infinite light of God, the rest of the worlds unfold. In the Kabbalah of Mahari Sarug, the Tzimtzum is not an act of removal, but rather an act of revelation. A hisgalus of a koyach of gvul from within the infinite so that it reveals itself as a finite capacity which still retains its infinite nature. And so all of the Tzimtzum is just another revelation. When it comes to finding the root source for our valuing of Tzimtzum and all of the concealment that comes about from it, if we look at the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, which is a Tzimtzum of concealment, a Tzimtzum of constriction, so sometimes if we don't have the proper understanding of it, it's not going to be enough to validate the persistent presence of concealment and absence in one's relationship with godliness. Because from the perspective of Rav Chaim Vital, which are the lower worlds of Ak and Abiyah, the lower expression of the Kabbalah of the Arizal, the most fundamental one, but lower, because we always know that the lower is most fundamental, because it's specifically through the lower that the higher can be revealed. It's the Das Tachton that enables the Das Elyon to be revealed on top of it, the Beis HaMikdash that would be built upon the Har. The Har is the Kabbalah of Rav Chaim Vital, the lower worlds of Adam Kadmon and Atzila, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. All that happens after the Tzimtzum. And that Tzimtzum, because it's representative of a lower world, a higher level of concealment, so that Tzimtzum, the removal, yes, it gives us an understanding of how concealment emerges into our lives, but it's not yet strong enough to validate and reveal to us how it's specifically within the constriction and the concealment and the he'elem and the not grasping that we encounter the ultimate light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From within the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, There's still a threat. We still might misunderstand and say, even though the Tzimtzum is important, nevertheless, undoing the Tzimtzum would be better. In the world of Maharisarug, where the Tzimtzum itself is revealed to be fundamentally revelatory and a furthering of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, that potent form of the Tzimtzum, Ka'adem Kamsa de Levushim Minayubei, where the emergence is an externalization of the infinite, which is taking shape as a finite expression, on that level of Tzimtzum, it's such a potent notion that any time that I encountered Tzimtzum in my life, from the perspective of Maharisarug's understanding of Tzimtzum, I have the ability to always realize why I'm in concealment. Concealment is revelation. The encounter with a mania, the encounter with a descent, Binah is always of hyper significance because it's perpetually revealing that which is the truest expression. Framed in other words, from the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, we start with an Or Ein Sof and then there's a Tzimtzum. So as long as we're in the Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum, we're always looking back to an Or Ein Sof that was prior to the Tzimtzum, which creates the perspective of that concealment is real, but nevertheless, I want to break through concealment and ascend and enter into a place of Or Ein Sof again. So in the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, it's not yet strong enough to keep us with the healthy mindset of how to deal with constriction at all times and to value constriction as a fundamental way that Hashem reveals himself. But in the Kabbalah of Maharisarug, there's no infinite light that is expressed prior to the emergence of the Malbush. That thing prior to the Malbush is ungraspability in and of itself. We can't even begin to talk about it. The first instantiation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light is the Tzimtzum itself. And from the perspective that the Tzimtzum is the Giloi rather than the perspective of Rav Chaim Vital, which sees the Tzimtzum as something that happens after the Giloi, so then that perspective of the potent, perpetual revelatory nature of this autogenesis that is emergent from within itself through the Tzimtzum of Maharisarug, there's always a way of being mamtik, the purpose of concealment. And so this Melech Echad, which is the light of Rabbi Nachman, the tzaddik that's able to go down into concealment in order to rectify the chitzonis of Malchus, to reveal the light of Rosh Hashanah. Mein Iker Zach is the light of Rosh Hashanah, the kibbutz hagadol. The avoid of Rabbi Nachman, the avoid of the descent of Malchus into the territories of Lakach Shvuyim Harbe, into the territories of that schoik and making fun. So there was two ways of looking at how to find a rooting in that schoik. What is giving shape? What is validating this perspective that allows us to laugh at the seriousness of the world and to break it up with the light of laughter, with the light of Mashiach Tzidkenu? So the first part, which we spoke about 2 days ago, was the schok of the sarim. The schok of the sarim is one form of schok, one form of understanding the tzimtzum. But the schok that we're going to see now is the schok of the book, that the king also asks for his book to be brought out. And it's in that book that we see the source of all of this laughter. And it's from this book itself that it's clear that the Sarim had learned about all of the other behaviors that they were able to mimic about the other nations. The Kabbalah of Rav Chaim Vital is the Kabbalah of Adam Kadmon. The first level after the Tzimtzum is the world of Adam Kadmon. Now, those are the Sarei HaMelech. The first laughter of the Sarei HaMelech is the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, which, yes, it gives space to the concealment of Binah and the necessity of descending down into the territories of Chitzonius and Malchus, but it's still seen as a concealment, and it's not yet potent enough to reveal the true essential nature of descending down into the territories of Binah and laughing at the world. It's only from the perspective of Olam HaMalbush, which is the world of the Torah, which is the Kabbalah of Maharisarug, where the emergence of the primordial Torah that is composed out of the Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim Kahadim Kamsa de Levushim Minayubei, where the concealment itself is what motivates the perpetual revelation of more and more. From that perspective of the Tzimtzum of the Olam HaMalbush, that's more than enough to give shape and confidence to the tzaddik on the level of Binah, who understands the difficult task of descending down into the territories of concealment. If we're only rooting it in the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, so then there's still the argument that Chochma can make to Binah and say, why is Binah going down? It's too dangerous down there. There's no value of elevating those worlds. Because in the end of the day, the Tzimtzum is going to be undone and we're going to leave with returning back to an infinite light. And so there would be a chash for a tzaddik on the level of Binah that maybe I should just stay above in Chochma without descending down into the worlds of concealment, without rectifying that which needs to be rectified in the lower worlds. But from the perspective of the Tzimtzum of the book, of the Tzimtzum of Maharisarug, of the Kabbalah of the Olam HaMalbush, from that perspective, there's always an answer to Binah. There's always an answer as to why we're descending down, because the He'elem is the Gilui. And it's not a descent just for the sake of an eventual ascent back to where I came from, but rather it's a descent that is going to double and triple and magnify and multiply and intensify the revelation of Chochma in a deeper way through the koach of Keser. So the first laughter and ridiculousness that sweetens all of the dinim is the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, is the schoik of the Sari HaMelech, the people, Adam Kadmon. But the next shlav of the laughter that this king is revealing on Rosh Hashanah, which is the secret of the tikkun of Chitzonius HaMalchus through Binah, that's going to be the Kabbalah of Maharisarug, which is the Olam HaMalbush, which is the world of the Torah. V'tziva HaMelech lahavi asa sefer shahaya kasav bo hamenusim v'hahanhaga shel kol umma v'umma. As the Sarim were making fun of all of the nations through that Tzimtzum, through showing that Binah is necessary and the descent is necessary, the Melech wanted to dig down deep into the true source of the Tzimtzum, which is the Kabbalah of Mahari Sarug, and that's the light of the Sefer. V'tziva HaMelech lahavi lo ha-sefer shahaya bo kasav kol hanimusim v'hahanhaga shel kol umma uvum. Malchus wants the higher root of Tzimtzum, so the king asks for the book in which all of the nimusim, all of the behaviors, all of the trends, all of the deeds and the morals and the values of each and every nation are engraved within this sefer. B'chol makom shaya poiseach es ha-sefer hayaroa shakasav bo hanhaga v'hanimusim shel ha'uma k'derech shahayu osim b'alei haschoik bamish. And every page that the king turned to, every page in this book, in this Tzimtzum of the Olam HaMalbush, that he turned to, he saw exactly what the Sari HaMelech were doing. Every act and every comedic overturning of significance, every laughing point and comedic point that decreases the air and the severity from the seriousness with which those other nations were taking themselves, even Klal Yisrael, that the Sarim were revealing, that the world of Adam Kadmon is revealing, the Melech saw it in the book as well, meaning all of the tzimtzumim and all of the shorish of the gevuros and all of the necessary to laugh, fall apart and reveal the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu down in the territories of concealment is not only rooted in the tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital in the world of Adam Kadmon and Sari HaMelech, but it's engraved and written within the book of the Malbush, within the tzimtzum of Mahari Sarug. Ki mistama gam ze asa aschoik v'ha-kamedi ra'a gam ken es ha-sefer ha-nizka le'el. Ki min hastam, from the perspective of the stiman, from the true perspective, the highest perspective of the source of the Gvuros, all of the tzimtzumim of Rav Chaim Vital and the tzimtzum of the Sari HaMelech and the schoik that they were rooted in, is entrenched and rooted in the original schoik, which is the schoik of the Olam HaMalbush, which is a very different type of tzimtzum. That's not a tzimtzum that removes, but rather a tzimtzum that reveals. And so the Melech, the Chitzonius HaMalchus, which is being metukan through the tzaddik that goes down into the territory of Binah to elevate Malchus back to its upper point within the Pnimius of Chochma, which is Pnimius of Atik and Reish Lo Yada, at this Suda Gedola, at this Kibbutz HaGadol of the light of Rosh Hashanah and the Hamtaka of all of the dinim, so he's revealing how all of the tzimtzumim are hidden specifically within the upper worlds of Olam HaMalbush, and that's why there's a value. That's why there's a value of descending down into the Tzimtzum. On this book, on this page, B'toch Shahaya Melech Yoshev al Sefer. The Melech is looking at this Sefer. Malchus is looking at the source of the awakening of Tzimtzum. Ra'a Shahaya Akabish Hanikra Spin V'haya Merachesh al Tzadei HaSefer V'hainu al Chudei Hadafin U'mitzad Hasheni Haya Oimed Zvuv. Suddenly, the king looks down at this book that's in front of him, and he sees that on the side over here, where all of the pages are unified, there's a spider that's crawling up. And that on the page itself, that the spider was theoretically crawling up to, was a fly. A spider and the fly. The spider was crawling along the side of the Sefer, on the unified point of the Dafin, and on the other side there was a fly. Umin hastam lehechan hoilecha akabish. And min hastam, from the perspective of stimud the stimin, from the full perspective of Keser, the Melech is looking at this. And l'chayra, where is the spider going? The spider is going to the fly. For our story, the spider represents Chochma and the fly represents Binah. The spider represents the Nukuda of Shmona, the Nukuda of eightness, which is that Lamalim and Hateva, which that's that perspective of Chochma. Akabish is Ayin Beis, which is the shame of Chochma, and Yesh, which is the secret of seeing the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis in the heart of everything, the perspective of Chochma that wants to have control over everything. The spider knows exactly how it's going to work. The spider knows exactly how it's going to reveal its next step by the beautiful spider webs that it's able to build. And then there's the Zvuv. The Zvuv is Binah. The Zvuv is associated with Amalek. The Zvuv is associated with the Yetzer Hara. The Zvuv is up and down and flying here and flying there. It finds itself in the territory of death. It's swatted away. The Akabish is Chochma, and the Zvuv is Binah. The Akabish is the tzaddik that doesn't want to descend down into the territory beyond Atzilus. The Akabish is the Shpaler Zayda. And the Zvuv is that tzaddik that descends down into the territories of constriction, and that's the light of Rabbi Nachman. So what the king is witnessing in the place of Tzimtzum and celebrating the value of those types of tzaddikim that have to descend down into the territory of Binah to reveal the light of Rosh Hashanah, the king is suddenly beginning to see all of the process. This is the Nasiya. For a neshama like Rabbeinu to come into the world, first and foremost, there had to be a collision between the spider and the fly. And the spider and the fly together, the 8 legs of the spider and the 4 legs of the fly with the 2 wings is 8 plus 6 is 14. It's the secret of Dimyon, Biyad HaNeviya Madame, the yichud of Yosef and David. But over here, as the king is watching, first and foremost, he's seeing the spider that wants to go and capture the fly. Why? Because the tzaddikim of Chochma want to swallow the possibility of Binah. They don't trust the ability to descend down into Binah. The spider sees the fly. The spider sees this thing that goes down into the territories of death, that is not rooted in based awareness, but is rather rooted in imagination, in that light of the Zvuv that can fly here, there, everywhere. And it goes down into the territories of darkness and ascends up afterwards. And the Akabish says there's no descent down into Binah. You can't descend down into Binah. It's dangerous. A person is going to get stuck in Yeshus there. If you leave Chachma, if you leave the Chudei Hadafin, that unification of the pages, so then you're going to get lost. And Chachma, the tzaddik, like the Shvaler Zayda, doesn't want there to be a descent down into constriction. It doesn't want to deal with the Yetzer Hara. It doesn't want to deal with the Yetzer Hara, which is like the fly that sits on the Miftache Halev. It wants to protect itself. It wants to rightfully live in the territory of revelation, in Atzilus. But the Zvuv, on the other hand, is the tzaddik that understands the necessity of going down. Why? Because it understands the schoik of the Sarim, the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, which is the Tzimtzum of Adam Kadmon. It also understands the Tzimtzum of Mahari Sarug, which is the Sefer. And so the fly understands that, yeah, sure, spider, I understand that you're afraid. I understand the descent downwards. I understand why you don't want me to descend down, because you're afraid that I'm going to lose my mind down there. You're afraid that I'm going to find myself stuck in constriction. By descending down into the activism of refining this worldliness from within Bria Yitzir and Asiya in the world of Bina, in the world of Dimyon. So I understand why the tzaddikim of Chachma think we're going to get lost. But in truth, the tzaddik of the Zvuv, the level of Rabbi Nachman, the tzaddikim of Bina, they want to go down. They want to reveal that it's specifically by way of going down from Chachma into the territory of Bina that will be able to ascend afterwards with a newfound light. So this machlokas between the Akabish and the Zvuv is the machlokas between the 2 tzaddikim, the tzaddikim of Chachma and Bina. Chachma, which doesn't want to see anything descend down into the realms of lowliness, into the realms of Yeshus, because it wants to maintain that unity of vision, that bittul. And the fly wants to descend down into the territory of constriction because it knows that by descending down, it's going to be able to reveal the true potency of the Akabish, the true potency of the spider. This is the battle. This is the battle. This is the machlokas, where the Shpaler Zayda, the light of Chochma, theoretically wants to swallow the Zvuv, which is Rabbi Nachman, the light of Bina. Ubetoch shahaya akabish merachish v'holech el azvuv, ba ruach v'hirim esadaf min hasefer v'lo haya akabish yakol leilech el azvuv v'chazra la'achayra. And what happens is that every time the spider was crawling a little bit to the fly and getting closer, before the spider was able to get onto the page, a ruach, a wind would come, and it would raise the page, and the page would rise up, and the fly would be protected on the other side of the page over here, and the spider wouldn't be able to retrieve the fly. And when this happened, the spider turned backwards and went back to where it was, only to try again. In the world of Maharisarug, in the Kabbalah of Maharisarug, in the Olam HaMalbush, the instantiation of Tzimtzum is something referred to as the Ruach Paskanit, which is Gematria Shabbos. It's the Ruach Paskanit that splits the Malbush, the upper Malbush and the lower Malbush, and allows the Malbush to fold this lower half up on top of the upper half, which is what becomes the engraving of the territory of the lower worlds. A Tzimtzum of literally a page turning, that this is where the light is fully revealed, where it's revealed at the top and the bottom, and the Kipul Hamalbush, or the Ruach Paskanit, is the wind that comes to cause the page to fold over itself, like the folding of a talis, and now what was originally filling this side is empty because it has doubled over on this side, and that's the Tzimtzum of the Olam of the Malbush. And so, what is protecting the fly, like we said? What is protecting the tzaddik on the level of Binah to ensure that it has the confidence to understand its task, to descend down into constriction, and not to be afraid of the akabish, which is the spider, the level of Chochma, which says, don't go down because you're going to get stuck in concealment. It's the light of the tzimtzum, of the ruach paskanit, of the olam malbush, of mahari sarug, which is what's happening here. What protects the fly? It's the wind. The wind comes up and it protects the fly. Every time Chochma wants to swallow up Binah and say there's no need to descend down, Binah comes back with the answer of the Ruach of the Olam HaMalbush, which is the revelation that no, all Tzimtzum, all descent downwards, all constriction, all concealment is ultimately for the purpose of a furthering of the revelation. V'lo haya akabish yachol leilech el hazvuv. And the akabish, the chachma, was not able to go and capture the zvuv. Why is it velo? Because ultimately the olam malbush and the descent is coming to reveal the highest level of concealment, which is he'elem ha'atzmi, which is the hasaga of lo, which is the fact that in the end of the day we can't grasp anything. Chachma thinks it can grasp something without the intervention of Binah. The descent of Binah into the territory away from Chochma is to remind Chochma that even though it feels that it has grasped everything, it still hasn't grasped everything because in relationship to what it can truly grasp, it has not even begun yet. Chochma, without the descent of Binah, runs the risk of falling into the trap of thinking that it has grasped Atzmus, that it has grasped everything, that it has destroyed the Yetzer Hara completely. Binah is there to perpetually remind Chachma that no, you've only rectified something in accordance to the level that you're at right now. But the infinite levels of growth that are available to us because of the perpetual ascendancy of God's Kedusha above and beyond our Kedusha and the perpetual imperfection of the self, that's what elevates the concept of Tzimtzum away from being a byproduct and a symptom that has to be overcome, and it transforms it into the very sight of the unfolding nature of the self. And this hasaga of lo, the lo da albam, that secret lamed aleph that rests at the heart of the malbush to reveal that the highest level is not grasping, which is what the Yetzer Hara teaches us, that we can't grasp it, that I have to make more and more gedarim to realize that I can't go further. So that's what protects the zvuv. So the perpetual attempt of Chochma to nullify Binah out of the fear that Binah is going to descend down into the realms of concealment and forget about absolute bittul is going to be the shorish of the Tzimtzum Ha'elyon, not only the Tzimtzum of the laughing Sarei HaMelech, which is the Tzimtzum of Rav Chaim Vital, but rather the turning of the page, which is the Tzimtzum of Mahari Sarug. And every time that would happen, because it would remind Chachma that Binah is necessary, that at the end of the day, the Tzimtzum is the highest revelation, the spider would return backwards. V'asa asma atzma be'arama ki ilu hi chozeret ve'eno rotze od leilech el hazvuv. And what the spider would do anytime this page would grow is Chachma sees that Tzimtzum and it says, okay, I understand. I understand the necessity of the Zvuv to go down into constriction. Shpala Zayda says, I understand why there's a need for a tzaddik like Rabbi Nachman. But then when the Tzimtzum would be over and that page would fall back down and the wind would stop and then the spider was able to see the fly again, the same dynamic would awaken again because the spider over here, Rabbeinu says something incredible. Rabbeinu says the spider would utilize a certain form of trickery and imply that it doesn't want to capture the fly anymore. And then when the page would come back down again, it would go again and chase after the fly. This would happen over and over. That the spider would try and attack the fly, Chachma would try and swallow Binah. Binah would persist and reveal the ascendant root of Tzimtzum, which is the Tzimtzum of the Malbush, which is the Ruach Paskanit, which is the revelation that the Tzimtzum is the fundamental revelation and why there's a hyper necessity of Binah to go down. But then whenever the wind would stop, Chachma, again, would awaken a certain form of trickery. Now here's something amazing because up until now we've explained that trickery and dimyon and arama and keilu and acting as if, those are in the territory of Binah. That's the mindset of Doime milsa la milsa, or lamahar davar dome, or mavin davar mitoch davar, the trickery, the lo shma, the yonasi tamasi. We usually associate that with the bina of the zvuv, the realm of the Yetzer Hara. But to find this arama by Chochma, this trickery by Chochma, seems to be the polar opposite, because Chochma represents the ideal with no necessity to descend down. But like we said in the introduction to the Yeshirim, is that the Shpaler Zayda was not menaged to Rabbi Nachman. The Shpaler Zayda understood the necessity of Rabbi Nachman, who would reveal the inner potency of what the Shpaler Zayda represented. That Chochma understands the need for Binah to descend down away from itself and to ascend upwards afterwards to reveal the light of Keser. The whole trickery of Chochma was to trick the Yetzer Hara, to trick the Samach Mem into thinking that it was joining this fight against the light of Binah. Because Chochma knows what the full purpose of itself is. Chochma is not in disagreement with Binah at its core. Chochma, yes, is avada worried that if we descend down into Binah, that we're going to get stuck. But Chochma knows the need for there to be a Tzimtzum within Chochma itself to reveal the potency of the Havein b'Chochma, the Shorish of Binah within Chochma, which is the Lamed Beis Nesivos Chochma, which is the extension from within Chochma into the territory of Binah, because that schlepping out of the Binah from within Chochma is ultimately going to be the place in which the true potency of Chochma is revealed. And what's the true potency of Chochma? The true potency is Pnimius Chochma, Pnimius Deradla. And what is that? That's the ability to be above and below at once, to be in Emes and Sheker at once, to be in the level of Emes La'amiso. And that's the secret of Chochma. That's Chochma holds within itself this trickery. And the radical proof of this is that when we look in Torah Aleph of Likutei Moharan, the first way that we learn about Chochma is that it's Yaakov from language of V'yakaveni zu pa'amayim, that Chochma is arama, Chochma is trickery. Chochma has the capacity to manifest in trickery itself. And so we see here that Chochma already knows why it needs Binah to descend down. It needs Binah to reveal the capacity of Chochma to extend itself into those territories of trickery, into those territories of Sheker. And so in order to continue the battle, in order to continue, that even after the Achabish has seen the purpose for Binah, which is the Ruach that comes to raise the page up, nevertheless, it has to go back and pretend that it doesn't yet know the story, because there needs to be this imagined hisnaglus against Binah in order for the full unfolding of it to take place. And v'chazra hadaf l'makomo v'chazra ha'akabish v'leilech halazvuv v'al shum hirim hadaf v'lo hinicha. An interesting Rosh Tevos over here is that we find v'asa asma ba'arama ki'ilu he choseres ve'ena rotza od leilech el hazvuv, that ve'ena rotza od leilech el hazvuv is the Rosh Tevos of Or Leah, the skin of Leah, because Binah is the mochan of Leah, the mochan of Dimyon, that concealed place where the mind has to extrapolate from within itself ways to overcome its own self, to beat the Yetzer Hara from within the Dimyon itself, to transform Lamed Yud Taf and that Chava Rishona into the secret of Lamdus and Dimyon de Kedusha and Chalomos Tovim. And so even though the Or of Leah, the secret of Torah Lishma, to be mamtik, that place of Lo Lishma, is associated with Binah, over here we're seeing how Chochma understands the need for Binah to descend down in order to reveal that light of Leah, which is the Arama of the Chochma, which is why it's Rosh Tevos, Ve'ena Rotza Od Leilech Elazvuv, that's to reveal the Or of Leah. That Chochma understands the mission, to reveal Pnimius Chochma, Pnimius Ta'atik. And then it would go back and forth. The same thing would happen over and over again. So the Tzimtzum would happen over and over. The Kipul Hamalbush, reminding Chochma, reminding the Akabish why the Zvuv, why Binah is necessary. V'chein haya kama pa'amim. And this happens many, many times. Kama pa'amim is Rosh Tevos Kaf Hadimyon. Achar kach shuv chazra ha'achabish leilech el hazvuv. Again, the spider tries to overcome, Chochma tries to overcome and awaken to push forth beyond understanding the necessity of the Zvuv and to push forth to destroy the Zvuv because it's afraid of this tzaddik descending down into constriction. To the point that the Akabish has gotten one leg on the page. So it's almost close enough to be able to get the Zvuv. V'shuv heirim hadaf es atzmo. V'shuv heirim hadaf es atzmo. Rosh Tevos Vav Hey Aleph, which is Rosh Tevos Aleph Hey Vav Hey. The Shem of Das, which is the gematria of Tov, which is the gematria of Zvuv, which is the unification of above and below. The page finally blows itself over, and the Akabish had its leg on the page. But instead of standing up, the page fell down, and it traps the spider underneath. Ad shenishara ha'achabish tachtav b'chalal bein hadaf ledaf. To the point that the Tzimtzum now covers over the Akabish, and Chochma is no longer able to try and attack the Zvuv. Chochma is no longer able to attack the Zvuv, which is Binah, because it has now been contained within the Halal, the original source of the Tzimtzum, that place of Dimyon de Kedusha, that place of Bein Daf Ledaf, Roshe Tevos Levad, that secret of the Bedidas Ha'elyona, where we can talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his Boididus, which is the rectification of the Dimyon. And the spider was stuck there. And the spider remained there until it was stuck and nothing remained of it whatsoever. And what happened to the fly? I'm not going to tell you what happened to the fly. So this part where Rabbeinu says, I'm not going to tell you what happened to the fly, it might go back to the beginning where Rabbeinu warned them and says, please remind you to tell you the whole thing, because that's how you'll understand everything. But it could also be that Rabbeinu, when he says, V'lo asaper lechem, I'm not going to tell you what happened to the fly, doesn't mean I'm not going to tell you, but V'lo asaper lechem, the thing that happened to the fly is that it was masig the level of low. It was masig the level of olam hamalbush. But what we see here is this perpetual process in which Chochma, the Shpaler Zayda, the light of Atzilus, is trying to swallow up the fly, Rabbi Nachman, the world's Abriya Yisir Anasiya, because of the fear that if we leave the territory of Chochma and we descend down into the changing chambers of Binah, then we're going to forget about Bittul and we're going to find ourselves in Yeshus. We're going to find ourselves stuck. And the Ruach Kadim, the Ruach HaMerachepes Al Panei Hamayim, that Tzimtzum, the Shorish of the Tzimtzum, the Shorish of the Tnua, the Olam HaMalbush, the perpetual awareness that we have not yet completed and that there's always more to complete, that's what protects the fly. That's what protects the necessity of Bina and Tzimtzum. And again, all of this is being celebrated on the day of the Simcha of Rosh Hashanah, the Tikkun of the Chitzonius of Malchus through Bina. And so we see the first instantiation of this encounter of the Akabish and the Zvuv, the spider and the fly, Chochma that's trying to swallow up Bina, and the Tzimtzum b'Sharasho Ha'elyon, which is perpetually protecting the fly, revealing why there is always to have a need for Tzimtzum, for the Zvuv, for the Dimyon. Over here, the Zvuv is the Yetzer Hara. Chochma wants to get rid of the Yetzer Hara. Chochma wants to negate the Yetzer Hara. Chochma just wants to be a tzaddik. It wants to get rid of all of the urges. It wants to get rid of everything. It wants to live only in a place of revelation. The Zvuv is light of the Yetzer Hara. The Zvuv is the recognition that yes, there's a Yetzer, but the Yetzer is the only way that there's going to be more and more good revealed. And the Tzimtzum, which is reminding us that we can never overcome the Yetzer Hara, because by dint of the fact that we're human, we're imperfect. And if we're imperfect, it's Kedushasi l'mala mikdushasechem, and we're never complete. Mamela, there's always going to be room to grow. Mamela, there's always going to be an element of the Yetzer Hara. Even after the Yetzer Hara is neshchat, as we're going to see, even after it's shechted, there's still going to be a movement. There's still going to be a light of Bina. And that's the first place that we're seeing the battle between Chochma and Bina, between the Shpaler Zayda and Rabbi Nachman, and the Tzimtzum, the highest revelation of the Tzimtzum b'Sharasho, which protects the necessity of Bina. And we're going to go in next year further on into the next stage of the story as well, Be'ezras Hashem.